Europe. Between 1939 and 1945. Millions wore uniforms. Not all were recorded. Some fought without recognition. Some died without names. When the war ended, their presence disappeared from history. Europe entered the war with carefully maintained records. Armies counted men. Units were numbered. Losses were reported. On paper, every soldier had a place. But reality did not follow the paper. From 1939 onward, as German forces expanded across occupied Europe, thousands of men were absorbed into irregular roles. Some were assigned to rear area security. Others were used for construction, transport, or guard duty. They wore uniforms. They carried weapons. But their status remained unclear. Many were not citizens of the Reich. Some were conscripts from annexed territories. Others were former prisoners of war offered survival in exchange for service. Their units were temporary. Their assignments unofficial. Often, their names never reached central records. In occupied regions, command structures shifted constantly. Units were merged, disbanded, recreated under new designations. Paperwork lagged behind reality. Clerks recorded what they could. What could not be verified was ignored. By 1941, the war in Europe had expanded beyond planning. Losses increased. Retreats began. Entire formations vanished within weeks. When this happened, unregistered soldiers disappeared first. There were no death notices for them. No letters sent to families. No graves marked with names. Some served alongside regular Wehrmacht units but were excluded from official strength reports. If they died, they were listed as auxiliary losses or not listed at all. Others were buried in mass graves, recorded only by location, not by identity. In the chaos of occupation, documentation became selective. Priority was given to officers, to formal units, to those who fit the structure. Those who did not were erased quietly. As front lines moved, evidence vanished. Field archives were burned during retreats. Temporary lists were abandoned. Witnesses were killed or scattered. By the later years of the war, entire groups of men existed only in memory. And even that memory began to fade. When the fighting ended, historians counted divisions. They counted equipment. They counted casualties. But they could not count what had never been recorded. The absence went unnoticed. As the war progressed, pressure increased on every level of command. Speed mattered more than accuracy. Survival mattered more than documentation. By 1942, German forces relied heavily on improvised manpower. Men were assigned roles without proper enlistment. Uniforms were issued without serial numbers. Weapons were shared. Identity became secondary. These soldiers guarded supply lines, escorted prisoners, dug trenches, cleared rubble after air raids. Their work was dangerous. Their losses frequent. But they remained invisible. When operations failed, reports were rewritten. Losses were minimized. Units that had existed only briefly were omitted entirely. Commanders focused on preserving reputations and avoiding blame. During retreats, the situation worsened. Columns broke apart. Stragglers were reassigned on the road. Some were executed for desertion without trial. Others died from exhaustion, exposure, or air attacks. No records followed them. In occupied cities, local archives were destroyed intentionally. Lists of auxiliary personnel were burned to prevent enemy intelligence from identifying collaborators. In the process, Names were erased permanently. Families waited. No confirmation arrived. No official death notices came. After 1943, the war consumed itself. Germany lost territory. Administrative control collapsed. Units withdrew without keeping logs. Temporary soldiers were abandoned with no instructions and no protection. Some attempted to surrender. Some were killed by advancing forces. Some disappeared into forests and ruins. When liberation came, Allied investigators focused on major formations and war crimes. They documented what was visible. Unregistered soldiers were not a priority. Without files, there was nothing to investigate. They were classified as missing. Then forgotten. Years later, post-war commissions attempted to reconstruct losses. They relied on surviving archives, on testimony, on official rosters. The erased men were absent from all three. Their service did not qualify for recognition. Their deaths did not qualify for statistics. Their existence did not qualify for memory. History moved forward without them. The moment of disappearance did not happen all at once. It happened silently, repeatedly, across Europe. In the final months of the war, chaos reached its peak. Entire regions changed hands within days. Retreating forces destroyed everything they could not carry. Files, personnel lists, field reports. Temporary soldiers were the first to be cut loose. Some units dissolved overnight. Men were ordered to discard uniforms, to blend into civilian populations, to disappear. Those who failed were executed as deserters. Others were killed by enemy fire while retreating without support. Bodies remained unclaimed. In mass graves near roads, forests, and ruined villages, thousands were buried without markers. Sometimes only a number was recorded. Sometimes nothing at all. After surrender, responsibility vanished. No army claimed them. No state recognized them. Post-war Europe rebuilt itself on records, compensation, official memory. Memorials listed names that could be verified. Those without documentation were excluded. Their absence became permanent. As years passed, witnesses died. Landscapes changed. Graves were built over. Roads were paved. Forests grew. The physical traces faded. By the time historians asked questions, there were no answers left. These soldiers had worn uniforms. They had followed orders. They had died in war. But they left no trace strong enough to survive bureaucracy. They were removed not by decision, but by omission. History does not remember silence. It records what is written. And their names were never written. The war ended in Europe in 1945. Cities lay in ruins. Borders shifted. Governments fell. Armies surrendered. Armies dissolved. What remained were documents. Files were gathered. Archives were reopened. Commissions were formed to count the dead. They worked with what survived. Lists, rosters, official reports. Anything without proof did not exist. Some units appeared complete. Others showed gaps. Names missing between pages. No investigation followed those gaps. Unregistered soldiers were not searched for. There were no files to open. No folders to label. Their absence caused no alarm. Graves across Europe were inspected. Marked graves were catalogued. Unmarked graves were counted only as numbers. Bones without names. Uniforms without identity. In many places, even the locations were forgotten. Families waited for years. Some waited for decades. They wrote letters. They filed requests. The answers were always the same. No record found. Service unconfirmed. Fate unknown. Eventually, the letters stopped. Post-war memory became selective. Memorials listed those who fit the records. Monuments engraved verified names. Ceremonies followed official scripts. Speeches followed official numbers. Silence filled the rest. The soldiers who had served without registration were not denied intentionally. They were simply excluded by process. By paperwork. By absence of ink. They had stood in formation. They had guarded roads. They had retreated under fire. They had died. But death without documentation left no trace strong enough to remain. As years passed, the landscape changed. Fields were plowed. Forests grew thicker. Villages were rebuilt over old battlefields. Roads crossed former graves. What could not be seen was no longer discussed. Witnesses aged. Memories faded. Details blurred. Stories became fragments. Fragments became rumors. Rumors disappeared. History books focused on divisions and commanders. On strategies and outcomes. On decisions made at the top. There was no space for men who existed only briefly. Men who served under temporary orders. Men whose names were never properly written down. Their disappearance was complete. They were not remembered as heroes. They were not remembered as victims. They were not remembered at all. In archives, there is no category for them. No section marked erased. No footnote explaining absence. Only clean pages. Only finished lists. The war is considered documented. Accounted for. Closed. But beneath that closure lies a quiet void. Men who wore uniforms and carried rifles. Men who followed orders and endured the same fear. Men who never returned. Their stories ended without witnesses. Without confirmation. Without acknowledgement. Time moved forward. New generations learned about the war. They learned dates. They learned names. But they never learned about those who were removed from history by silence. Their presence survives only in gaps. In numbers that do not add up. In graves without markers. This is where they remain. Not in memory. Not in record. Only in absence. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing. More forgotten history is coming.